Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Lord, for those who are here, and pray for the right words of wisdom that you would have us to know today, and we thank you for the rains and the farmers, and thank you, but we also are saddened by the deaths and missing people, and we pray for restoration, with those people and their families that are, and we just pray, for you to come today. Amen.
Amen. That was such a good prayer. Thank you. Does anyone want to read 1 Corinthians 11, chapter 11, 1 through 16?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Now I command you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions even as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head. But every wife who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, since it is the same as if her head were shaven. For if a wife will not cover her head then she should cut her hair short. But since it is disgraceful for a wife to cut off her hair or shave her head, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. For man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. That is why a wife ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, in the Lord, woman is not independent from man, nor man of woman. Through 11?
Through 16.
Okay. For as woman was made from man, so man is now born of woman, and all things are from God. Judge for yourself. Is it proper for a wife to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him? But if a woman has long hair, it is her glory. For her hair is given to her for a covering. If anyone is inclined to be contentious, we have no such practice, nor do the churches of God.
Okay, so interesting stuff. Tough to read, not preached on a whole lot. Haven't heard too many sermons on that one. And I will say, I'll admit, the first time that I ever read this, I actually went, I'll laugh at me, I do so many goofy things, but I went and bought a really cute hat because I thought, well, if I need to wear a hat to church, I can wear a cute little hat to church. And I thought, maybe that's what we're supposed to do. And you wonder, and certain denominations, they absolutely take that very literally. They cover their hair, and they, the women don't cut their hair at all, and, all kinds of different things. And so it's one of those, I think it's interesting, and not that I'm trying to convince you one way or the other, but Instillboro has an interesting approach to it, and it's interesting to talk about, because it is one of those things that you go, well, haven't heard that preached on lately. What in the world are they talking about, and why? And so anyway, that's that one. So Instillboro starts with a little story. He says that wearing hats used to be very serious business. He visited a very traditional bank, and it had wooden counters and curly metal grills without any bulletproof glass or modern surfaces. There were 2 racks for muskets with bayonets near the entrance and a shelf of top hats. He asked the doorman what the top hats were for, and they said in case a gentleman needs to go out in the street and doesn't have his hat available. I didn't ask what the bayonets were for, or Instillboro didn't. When George VI got married in 1923 to Elizabeth, later known as the Queen Mother to distinguish her from Elizabeth II, they wanted a ceremony broadcast on the radio. The Archbishop of Canterbury vetoed it because some people might listen to it in the pubs without removing their caps. Today, wearing hats or not wearing them are optional. But only a century ago, it was a matter of public disgrace to go out without one. No adult could go in the street without a hat, and women kept them on indoors as well, unless they were at home with very close friends or family. And women only let their hair down when getting undressed for bed. Even till recently, women have always worn hats in church, and men haven't. And in some churches, this is still the rule, and many wish it was. That's because these rules come from the Bible, from this chapter. So are we disobeying the Bible if we ignore these rules? Paul thought that Christian worship at Corinth was disgraceful. What is disgraceful to one person may not be disgraceful to another. But everyone agrees that Corinth, there was plenty to be concerned about. People were drunk at communion, 1 Corinthians 11:21. One church member was sleeping with his mother, 1 Corinthians 5:1. Worship was so disorderly that Paul had to remind everyone to address the congregation one at a time, 1 Corinthians 14:30. But the biggest problem for the reputation of the church was the hairstyles. Paul expends more time and more arguments on this matter than anything else, except perhaps the resurrection. It depends how you measure it. So, what was so terrible about hairstyles? Like many big issues, it came down to prejudice and fashions. People assume things about you from the way you dress, both then and now. Someone dressed like a punk is expected to be violent, and skimpy clothes implies loose morals. Completely uncoordinated and scruffy clothing implies an unmarried academic. The Roman world has some very fixed prejudices about men's hair. Men's hair had to be short because long hair was effeminate. They sometimes portrayed or captured enemies with long hair in pictures or statues. That's how this showed how barbaric they were, and it implied that they were a bit soft too. It was becoming a culture marker as well for active homosexuals in the first century. It was a way to advertise for lovers among the young in the new Roman culture, particularly in the Dionysian cult, which was rife in Corinth. Though in most of Roman culture, it was looked down on with utter disdain. Which, by the way, annoys the heck out of me that every picture they show of Jesus had long hair.
Right,
He didn't have long hair. He really didn't. It would have been like totally, it would have just been a horrible thing culturally for him to have had long hair.
Where do we get the idea of him always having long hair?
I don't know. I guess my thought is maybe because he traveled, around and things like that, and so
They thought he never had access to scissors.
I guess so. I don't know. And you would expect him to be a little bit scruffy, but at the same time.
Right.
But then again, I guess it's the same way that if you go in different houses of different races, Jesus changes colors,
Well,
and
yeah.
he
We always
also.
look at him as white, and I don't think that's
No,
going to be
he
the case at
No,
all.
no.
would
Where
be a
he
Jewish,
came
Middle
from,
Eastern
he'd be
type
very
descent.
dark
Should be
skinned.
dark, yeah.
Yeah. And also, from the description of him, we show him as this amazingly just beautiful, perfect picture of a man, and it says, he was very ordinary, very
And rough.
just kind of a rough,
Just
scruffy,
Yeah.
He was homeless.
Right.
And so he wouldn't,
Right.
he wouldn't look like that at all. But anyway, I find it interesting that we
I'm
do
thinking
that.
maybe we're getting the long hair because of the Jewish, or if you look like the Jewish rabbis, they have the long.
They wear
Long
they
hair.
grow their hair long.
But that was
Don't they
just
have the long
sideburns.
beards
Right.
and the sideburns,
yeah,
but
just
not the whole
there.
thing?
Yeah.
I'm just
I
saying
don't know.
that may be where we're getting.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So the beard, he would have the beard, but he wouldn't have the long hair. But anyway, it's interesting. So
Yeah.
women's hairstyles were even more important. The cost of your hairstyle indicated your status in society. Princess Diana reputedly spent 20,000 pounds a year on hairstyling. This would have been small change for a high society Roman woman. They used curling tongs, elaborate golden hair braids, and many slave hours. Given that most Roman women had straight black hair, think Italians, the ringlets that were fashionable in the first century took hours to achieve. Paul elsewhere warned Christian women not to spend too much on hairstyles. 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10, I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. I don't think that he minded women looking good, but it was a matter of modesty. Those who had spent lots of money on their looks were looking out for lovers. So here too, it was prejudice. People made assumptions from hairstyles. The absolutely worst sign was a woman who wore her hair loose. In public, women wore their hair up, and respectable women covered it. Though many women of the first century had no more than a skimpy hairband, no one except very young girls would wear their hair down in public. They could let their hair down at home among friends, but never in public. One exception was prostitutes. They wore it down as a form of partial undress. And the other exception, women convicted of adultery. In later Roman law, and possibly the first century, they were shaved bald. They couldn't wear hair up or down. I guess the modern equivalent to this rule about hair covering is wearing a bikini. This is okay with friends in your backyard or on the beach, but not in church. And even in a restaurant on the hottest day in a resort without air conditioning. Except perhaps in a tourist-only enclave where no locals will be offended. And fashions for bikini tops are rather like the fashions for hair covering. Women who wanted to show off their hair wore nothing but thin hair bands, and women who wanted to show off more skin wore skimpier bikinis. And somehow even the tiniest covering is considered more decent than nudity. In the same way, even the tiniest hairband in the first century was considered a hair covering. Well, there's no accounting for taste and fashions, we just have to live with it. But we do need to take notice because the fate of the gospel is at stake. The way that we dress makes statements to other people about what we are. We don't want people to think that we live immoral lifestyles, and equally, we don't want to come across as out-of-touch academic nerds. Of course, I find offense to that statement, by the way. Of course, what we wear doesn't make much difference in the end, and of course, we hope that people will get to know us and overcome their prejudices. We should avoid anything which puts people off the gospel unnecessarily, though. The dress and hairstyle are far less important today than in first century society. Do you want to take over, or do you want me to keep going?
Some of the Corinthian believers had got it absolutely wrong. So Paul had to remind men to have short hair. However, the actual wording he used is difficult for us from another culture. In verse 4, Paul says literally that men should not have down from their head. Have what down from their head? Paul doesn't say, and we have to guess. Have dandruff coming down? Have ribbons hanging down? Paul is vague on purpose. He is using a euphemism for something disgusting. It's like when Paul speaks about the man who has his father's wife, 1 Corinthians 5:1. What does that mean? Has his father's wife's eyes? Has tea with her? Of course, we understand this euphemism because we still use it today. To have a woman means to have intercourse with her. But even this is a euphemism because intercourse just means conversation. We are avoiding saying having sex with her or having sexual intercourse. Our language is full of euphemisms, and the same happened in Paul's day. What did Paul's euphemism mean? What mustn't hang from men's heads? Most translations follow the King James, having his head covered, even though there is no word for covering in the text. Well, they had to fill Paul's gap with something, so covering, correct? It can't be because there's nothing disgraceful about a man covering his head. Both Jews and Romans deliberately covered their heads when praying. Fortunately, Paul explains his euphemism with plain language in verse 14. If a man has long hair, it is a disgrace to him. So it is the long hair hanging from his head which is so disgraceful. And Paul is being coy about it because it is such an utter disgrace. Well, it was a disgrace then, but today it just makes you look a bit different. You might look like a drug dealer, but no one assumes that you are one. So should we forbid men from having long hair? Does it look effeminate? Should we give Jesus a haircut in all those long-haired portraits? After all, Paul calls long hair a disgrace. So is it? Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. Is it a command in the Bible? Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. It was only for those in that culture. Christians obeyed this command for the sake of the gospel. They recognized that Christian men had the freedom to have long hair, but people would think they were advertising for homosexual partners. So Christians avoided long hair so they wouldn't bring disgrace on the gospel. Today, long hair doesn't mean that anymore, so we can ignore the command. The Corinthian women also had to be careful about their hair. If they didn't wear it up, people would think that they were promiscuous. Here, too, the language is a little difficult because of the cultural differences. Verse 5 literally criticizes women with their head uncovered, but by what? Did Paul expect her to wear a shawl or a veil or a burqa or an Easter bonnet? Whatever it is, everyone knew what it was because Paul says, verse 13, Judge for yourselves, is it proper? Verse 16, if anyone wants to be contentious about this, we have no other practice, nor do the churches of God. Paul didn't need to explain it. Everyone knew that women kept their hair up. Paul wasn't looking for something to cover their hair, but to cover their head. Their hair should be covering their heads, not covering their shoulders. Her hair is the covering which every woman should have on their heads. In fact, Paul tells us this plainly in verse 15. Her hair is given to her as a covering. In the good old days of the Roman Empire, women did wear hair coverings. They wore a modest shawl over their head in public or when guests visited. Jews did the same, and it was said of one pious woman that not even the ceiling in her house had even seen her hair uncovered. But head covering in the first century went the way of bathing suits today. In Victoria's day, they were like pajama suits. Now there are a couple of ribbons. The so-called head covering in Paul's day was usually a headband or a coronet. By the time of Clement in Alexandria, a church leader in AD 200, he said it was sufficient for women to bind up their hair simply with a plain hairpin. Although that seems to me that kind of accomplishes the goal, because it keeps it up. It keeps it up off the shoulders, and it keeps it up. So the more it keeps it up, even though it's not covering the hair, it's keeping it seeming shorter.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
What about today? Most women wear hats or veils or burqas if they wish, but the Bible doesn't tell them to. Paul told them to wear their hair up because it was indecent to have it down. Till recently, our culture agreed women let their hair down only for lovers, but now it is perfectly normal for women to have their hair down. So it is a disgrace for women to have their hair down. Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. Is it a command in the Bible that women should have their hair up in church? Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. It was only for those in that culture. You might think we have all agreed on something which was obvious and something which has no consequences, but actually the consequences are huge, because we have decided that something which was a clear command in the Bible no longer applies to us. And there may be other commands in the Bible which no longer apply. This is an important insight, but it is also a slippery one. Some people might say it is part of a slippery slope. So let's make clear what kind of things this works for. We decided that these two commands about hair didn't apply to us. Why? Because the reason for obeying was to avoid disgracing the gospel. Why doesn't that apply now? Because it is no longer disgraceful. So it depends on the reason for the command. We have to ask, does the reason still apply? God isn't a God of rules. He is a God of goodness and love. He gives us rules to help us live a life of goodness and love for others, i.e. the reason for the rules, helping us to live good lives, overrules the rules. Given all that, I think you can work out the issue of male headship yourself, but I'll just give you a few brief pointers to get you started. In Roman and Jewish culture, it would be disgraceful for a woman to lead men. Leading worship for men was especially forbidden. It would insult the divine. Women didn't even say grace over food at home in the presence of men. They didn't attend any teaching sessions in the synagogue. The synagogue teaching room was called the andron, the men's room. They didn't have enough education to teach, and anyway it would be a disgrace. If any non-believers attended, they'd think the monkeys were ruling the zoo. That's how Jews and Romans thought, and the church wanted to convert them. But it wasn't how Christians thought. Paul said everyone was equal, Galatians 3:28. Slaves and freeborn are equal in God's eyes and should be in our eyes. So Christians tried to treat them as equal as much as was legally possible. Men and women are equal in God's eye and should be in our eyes. So Christians tried to treat them as equal as much as was socially acceptable. Here in 1 Corinthians, we find Paul pushing female equality as much as possible. He lets them pray out loud, so long as they have their hair up decently. He lets them prophesy out loud, even in a public service worship, 11:5. He lets them attend to the teaching sessions, though they can't join in, 14:34 through 35. It was amazing enough that they were allowed into the men's room. Of course, men's room these days means restroom. Paul couldn't push it too far without bringing utter disgrace on the church. So what about today? Is it a disgrace for women to speak or even teach in church? Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. Is it a command in the Bible that women should keep silent in church? Yes, it was, and no, it isn't. It was only for those in that culture.
Okay, so kind of interesting stuff, I think.
I still think you should have read that last part because it was about women speaking. in church.
It fits in well, doesn't it?
What I was thinking about is, with Jill having prepared for this lesson, she had to decide what kind of hairstyle she was going to do. And she decided the end point of saying, it's okay to have your hair down, right?
So it's still, to me, clear as mud.
Yeah. Well, the thing for me is the slippery slope, because I think a lot of the problems we get into these days is the slippery slope. Is,
People
well,
pick and choose
it's a
what they
different
want.
culture, so that doesn't apply anymore. I think that's a really dangerous thing
It
to
is.
say. Well, that doesn't really apply anymore. How do you decide that? What in the Bible? How do you decide that section of the Bible is okay to change because of cultural changes, and yet you still shouldn't steal? Why shouldn't we change that rule? Why don't we change the 10 Commandments and make them culturally acceptable?
Well, I'm thinking
Yeah.
about, you're talking about cultural change.
Right.
You know, in my parents' generation, in the 40s and 50s, what you would see on TV, was one thing.
Right.
Nowadays, it shocks me, the things that are
Right.
culturally accepted on
Right.
TV.
I think the question, for me, the real question is it sin? Because, there are some things that are style and there are some things that are legitimately sin. And I think that God doesn't forbid us to sin because he likes rules and because, he's just up there ready to strike us down with lightning. I think that sin in of itself is, someone compared it, Aaron actually compared it to antifreeze. I mean, it seems, it's like, it tastes very sweet. It's very syrupy. It seems very good, but it kills you. And sin in and of itself is something that truly, truly eats away at your heart and your life and destroys families and destroys all kinds of things. And if you think about it, the things that are sexual immorality, how that just can destroy lives. Even things like cursing and vulgar language, how that can hurt people and hurt lives, and gossip and slander, and what that does, and lying in and of itself, how that just can destroy people and destroy relationships, and those things that are truly that are sin. I mean, those are the things that in my mind that doesn't change. It can't change because it destroys people and it's bad in and of itself. Things as far as, like clothing styles, and I think you can take it by far to an extreme, but, obviously, I think it's important to dress modestly and things like that, because you don't want to portray an image that doesn't cause people to sin, and I think that that's where you get the difference. If how I'm dressing, obviously this wouldn't be good for the 1800s, they wouldn't have been real thrilled with that, but how I'm dressed now, that wouldn't cause anyone to sin, or how my hair is. Now, if I showed up in my, actually, me in a halter top wouldn't cause anybody to sin either, but if I had a little better figure, it might, I don't know, but anyway.
But I think that's where they start with the hair up and hair down. That's kind of because back in those days, the hair down was just one step
Exactly.
on this pathway. Because once they put their hair down, then maybe they'd show a little bit more skin, and then they'd wear a
Right.
bikini, and then they were naked, and then they were committing adultery. It's
It
part of
brought
the
a different
same.
image to mind, I
Yeah,
think,
it's part of
than
the
it does
same
now.
gray area.
Right.
I've thought about that before too, because, this screams flower child hippie, and everybody, just really kind of what I am, but I've thought about that too, about the hair up or down in church and stuff, or whether it should be
Uh-huh.
covered, and
Yeah.
whether or not, because like you, I don't want to offend or be improper,
Right.
especially in the place
Right.
that I'm worshiping.
Worshiping, right.
You know.
Okay.
But it's interesting because we still have certain rules in our mind, because if somebody walked in wearing a string bikini, we'd be like, that's not appropriate. But take that to the past culture, and a lot of what we've done and dressed for in church, like they would want me to wear a hat until I'm in the building, and they would want you guys to wear hats in the building. That to them would have appeared, oh my gosh, that's horrible. That would be much like somebody showing up in their panties or string bikini to church today. So it's interesting the context of it.
Well, I
You
think,
can't walk into a restaurant with a string bikini either.
Right,
Right.
You know,
that's true.
I mean, that's
But
still
unless,
there's a-
unless, like you
that's
said,
a
if you're on a
tourism-
restaurant
yeah.
in the beach in
Right.
Florida,
Right.
Or tutors.
or
No, we'll probably kick you out. They don't like
They
competition.
even have
no,
corn.
I have something to say. It's just like, I think the emphasis of what Paul's trying to say is be considerate of those who are weak, or new. Like, you know, guys wearing tank tops might cause a weak woman to fall, you know, sexually, or bikinis, you might call a
Create
weak
the
guy to
temptation.
fall sexually.
Yeah.
Or if it hinders the gospel, like for instance, if we were on a mission trip in, you know, a primarily Muslim country, I certainly wouldn't dress this way, and I would, you know, I would
Right.
cover my hair, and
because they would be so focused on
on
that.
that it would distract from
That-
the gospel, which I think is the point. The one area though that I mean, maybe y'all can speak life into me on this, but that I kind of struggle, because he also has a really interesting one on male headship in the home and all this kind of stuff, and I have very, I don't know, I have some seriously opinionated and varied opinions on it, and kind of wavering and things like that, because you know he brings the point that was based off of, and he goes into a little bit here and more in the next one, which I mean, if y'all are brave, we'll jump into, but he goes into it, and you know he talks about how that the culture was based upon the teachings of Aristotle, which had the man as the head of the household, and like the woman basically oversaw things within the house, but if there were any guests there or if it was outside of the house, and the man oversaw that, and it was and Aristotle of course was a pagan philosopher, but that's how things were done at that time. So if you didn't do it that way, then you would offend people, so we had to do it that way, which makes sense, and I really liked that really well until Aaron and I had a nice little discussion on it, and I think he has some different opinions than I do on all that kind of stuff, but I mean we get along okay, it's good, you know, as far as we navigate that. But one of the things he said that he felt like in Stoneborough, you know, he brought out some really good points, but he talked about he felt like it was incomplete. And so I started studying on my own, and then the one thing that really bothered me, for lack of a better way to say it, and I mean it's not bad, but it repeatedly, the Bible uses, you know, the church, you know, Christ being head over the church as a, you know, as a parallel to marriage, and you know that, you know, just as Christ oversees, is the head of the church, and the husband's the head of the wife, and he repeatedly brings that into play. And so I started in my own mind going, okay, what does it mean, Christ being over the church? You know, what does that mean? And I thought, well, it's kind of like the church is the hands and feet of Christ on earth, just like the woman within the home is kind of the hands and feet of, you know, making things go, you know, essentially, you know, family and making things take place and things like that. But then the Christ also, you know, provides for and teaches and protects and watches over the church, and in that way, you know, the husband does over the wife as well. But it's kind of an interesting, and I bring this up because you're right. You question, you know, how far do you take it? When you look at the culture and you look at, you know, yes, they said this, and yes, this was for this culture, but at the same time, I'm kind of getting into a little extra stuff here, but at the same time, you see other parallels in the Bible, and you're going, you know, I don't know what I think of that. I don't know exactly what to take from that, because as a just exceptionally independent woman, I think Aaron's called me a force of nature before, which I would agree with, and that I'm very independent, very strong-minded, but I also very, very much want to submit to God and whatever He says, whether I like it or not, because He knows a lot better than I know. And you know, in that you wonder how much of it is culture and how much of it is truly kind of this grand design of, you know, something, I guess, beyond my scope and understanding. I probably babbled a lot, and that may or may not make sense.
I think it's subject to interpretation, because what it says is the man should be the leader of the household, but then we take, if you're sexist, you take that and you say, okay,
Oh,
that,
yeah, way
that
too
means
far.
the woman shouldn't talk, that means the woman should not ever make any decisions,
Right.
that means the woman should never say no if the
Right.
if the man says do this,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. We're interpreting and going way down that pathway, and I don't think that's what that means, because
No.
if you think about an organization and that leader in that organization, if you're the leader of that organization and you don't take any input from anybody else in the organization, you will
Not a
absolutely
very good
fail.
leader.
Your
Right.
organization will crumble and die, and all the people will quit or whatever, and your organization will fail. So this is similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because you have a leader does not mean that everybody else just cowers down and does exactly as the leader says. The other people in the organizational structure feed information to the leader, but you can't have two chiefs.
Right, this is true.
And so that's what I think God is saying
Which
is you
I don't
can't
like
have
it.
two chiefs.
This is true.
That's, so if there's a discrepancy,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll be the first to admit that, there's a couple things that I'm better at than Janice, but there's a lot of things that Janice, I've got 2 daughters. So when it comes to what it's like to be a 9-year-old girl, I'm out of my element, and that's where Janice takes over, and I let her lead that, and then I want her to let me lead with, when we're buying a car or when we're financing the house and some other things that maybe I have a better feel for.
Understand for it,
I'm
right.
okay with being
there's-
vice president.
Because you get you get 90% input into every decision. It's not. Well, I think we take it to an extreme. I think we say, well, if the husband's the leader of the household, that means like literally the woman won't drive, the woman won't talk, the woman will never refuse anything, blah blah blah. You go way down that. That's not what it says.
Right.
It doesn't say that. We're tumbling down that little rabbit hole. So.
Well, and all good things, I think, in Scripture, Satan really twists. Like, he really uses
Yeah.
Scripture, and he uses good things for evil. I mean, even down to, things like sex and alcohol and things like that. If used properly, can be good, but if not used properly, can be really, really bad, And so I think he
Pretty much
twists.
anything can be that way.
Oh yeah.
I can remember when I was in college and we were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And my mom said, well, isn't that dangerous? And I said, Mom, drinking too much water is dangerous. Anything can be taken to extreme like that.
Yeah. And you're right. It's the moderation of things that is the.
And with the leadership thing, my next door neighbors have taken that, they're a little bit more serious about it than me and my husband are. But they take it to mean he's in charge of leading their spiritual life. He sets the pace.
Yeah.
They work together, she runs the bills, she does this, everything is a kind of a joint adventure.
Right.
But the setting and the goal and the spiritual walk is his job as the head of the household to make sure they all kind of stay on the same path.
Yeah.
And he takes that kind of charge and responsibility.
Yeah.
And they really, that's how they interpret it.
Right. And Aaron looks at it much the same way. And he was asking, before we got married, he said, are you okay with that? And I said, as long as you're ahead of me, which means, he has to really work, because I'm not going to slow down. I'm not going to be less of a Christian. And so he has to
He has
really
to
work.
get in front.
Exactly.
He has to sprint ahead.
Which is good. I mean, that's a good thing. And I will say, there's certain parts of it, and this is really bad. This shows how, I'm a hypocrite and all kinds of weakness in me and all kinds of things. But hate to even say it, my first 2 marriages, for those watching online who don't know the stories, but that turned out crummy and all that. But anyway, in those, they both, even though they made about the same that Aaron makes, they both felt like, the wife needs to work outside the home and all this kind of stuff. And with Aaron, he thinks either way, it's up to me. If I want to, great. If I don't want to, great. Totally up to me, but it's his job to provide and to do that regardless. And that's one of those things where, as much as I want to be equal, I kind of like that, because I'm going, well, that's nice, that's good. I can do the ministry, and I can do the conferences, and I can homeschool the kids, and I can do all these things that I really want to do, and it's nice not to have that pressure. So I will say, in that I also have a little bit of hypocrisy.
Yeah. Well, and it's
Whatever you wanna
interesting
call
though,
it.
because both parents can't have that choice,
right,
If they
right.
both choose to do nothing, then
Right,
you're
exactly.
homeless.
That's true.
So
Very true. To
you're
do
right.
nothing.
But I think it's interesting, well, to
I know
not
what you
bring
mean.
income.
I know what you mean. Right.
That's what I mean.
So, well, and in the other 2 marriages, I worked full time. I mean, and I did, and that was fine. But just the
But it was
lack
kind
of
of forced,
pressure
and there was
is.
an
Well, and I was
assumption.
okay with it. I mean, my mom worked full time, and I just kind of assumed, that's what you do, and I did. But I will say it's very difficult to do and raise a family and do all of it well, because it's just hard. It's just, there are only so many hours in the day, and you feel like, or at least I felt like, there were certain areas that kind of suffered. And then in the last year, being able to work from home, and I've still worked like crazy, but my schedule's been flexible, and I've been working from home. As far as with the kids, it's made it so much easier, because there is so much more flexibility that I feel like I'm a better mom, and I'm not as exhausted at night because I haven't, had kids throwing spitwads at me all day long. And so I'm a little bit more patient with my own kids, and so, certain things like that, but I don't know. But
The only other comment I would make about the the man being the head of the household is, from a man's perspective, if the wife takes control of the household and doesn't allow you any decisions, then that feels very unnatural. You know, because if you're the breadwinner, you're going out and you're busting your butt and you're working hard, and then you and to a certain extent, we all have things in our jobs where we just have to do what we're told, and we don't get to make any decisions, and we don't get to do what we want, because some days you probably would not show up to work, but you don't get to do that. But then you show up at home, and all of a sudden you're not doing what you want either, because the wife is the head of the household. She's telling you, do this, do that.
Right.
No control. And that will drive somebody insane.
Insane, right.
So,
It would follow the same thing. You would still, even if the wife was the head of the household on those things, you would still be taking 90% input. I mean,
Exactly.
It would,
Exactly.
to be successful,
So,
it would still have
yeah.
to flop.
Well, to me, you have to figure out who does better at the
At different
bills,
things,
who does
Exactly.
better at
Exactly.
this or that and the other, and
Exactly.
it seems natural to me that whoever excels in those areas is the
Should
one
do
that ought
those
to be in
things.
control of those areas.
yeah.
In my first marriage, my husband really wouldn't work, and so he would use that I am the man and the head of the household
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
you know, and so as a woman, it seemed like that my description of whatever that was, you know, was blurred because I had to go be the breadwinner, but I
And
had
also
Right.
the head.
no
Or
say
and also
in-
give in on all
and
this
then
other stuff.
have to argue or beg for $1 or $2 so I could get a lunch at where I was working. I mean, you know,
Right.
it's more.
I
Yeah.
think in
That
my
was
mind
a
they go hand
really
in hand.
twisted way,
And
right,
in this
yeah.
culture, the women weren't working. That was just kind of, they were
They took
taking care of the
care.
household. They
Well,
were
and this was
earning wages.
even here up
So-
into the 50s and 60s,
Right.
that's the way it was.
So that's the context of that.
Well,
So the minute you say one person's going to earn all the income and the other one's going to be head of the household,
It
I
doesn't
think
work.
you create a big discrepancy there.
Right.
Yeah.
And that may be why, if the guy's the breadwinner and then the wife is the head of the household, that may be more why that
Right.
feels very
I don't
unnatural.
know, I think-
Because again, if you're bringing the money in and then
Right.
you're having to ask permission
Doesn't make
to
sense.
someone else.
I think what you
Doesn't-
said though, there's something really valid to that, and that's the other thing that kind of bothered me with. I love the idea of, well, that was the teaching of Aristotle, and that was for them, and I mean, like as who I am, I'm like, yeah, that's great. But men have a certain just a inclination for leadership almost, and I've seen, and I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, because I certainly want to offend me, but in the past, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years, when we've kind of, I think a lot of culture has really belittled men and taken away that, that role, that who they are, that, you've seen them, I don't know the right way to say this, but you've seen them kind of step down from all that they could be.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
They don't reach their full potential.
They don't
Exactly.
know which way to
Exactly.
jump.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think there's something I think it's been very damaging,
Yeah.
because used to, if you look back in like the sitcoms from the 50s, they painted dads in a really positive picture.
Yeah.
And if you look at them now, even the ones that are supposedly family friendly, kind of make him out to be an idiot, which is not good. It's not. There's something very awry there.
And I don't think I would go to say that men are inherently better leaders than women, because I don't think that's true. I've seen plenty of women that are very good at leadership, but I would say I would agree with you that if you belittle them and if you set them up for failure, they will fail. They will not reach their full potential. They need, it's just like the CEO of the corporation. The CEO of a corporation steps out of his corporation and goes to the convenience store or the grocery store. He's not going to lead anything because he doesn't have the support of all the people. He is not the corporation. The corporation is the support structure, and he might be a great leader with the support structure behind him. And so I think if you say to the man, you have to be the leader of the household, I think you have to support that man and help him get to his full potential, and then he can be the leader of the household. But if you try to be the leader of the household, then nobody, and the wife belittles you, the children belittle
It
you,
just
and
makes them
nobody
all-
gives you any decision-making authority and vetoes everything you say, all of a sudden you're really not the head of the household. The support structure is not supporting you, it's falling out from underneath. So, That's a very important
Feed
part of
the
that.
flame.
Like you said, they have to reach their full potential. You know, and I would say you could have that. You know, you could have the wife be that, but I think more often it's the man.
I think there's something kind of innate though in men. I think women can be really good leaders, and I would consider myself to be a leader. I mean, I think I've got lots of leadership qualities, but I don't need to be, if that makes sense. Like, I think there's something in men that kind of needs that, kind of like women. I think there's something innately that maybe needs security or
And
love.
I think that
or,
it
you know,
shows
different
up
things. I don't know.
with the way that
Maybe.
men deal with problems.
Mm-hmm.
Men are problem solvers. You see a problem, here's a solution, here's what you do.
Here's what you do.
Fix it.
Here's step one.
You know,
Why aren't
yeah,
you doing step one?
yeah.
Just do step
You know,
one right now.
Whereas women, a lot of times, they don't want to fix it, they want to let you hear about what the thing is.
Right.
And so, it's how we're wired.
Right, exactly. And so, but at the same time, having two daughters, I understand that there's certain things where I'm not going to be good at. And it's that kind of scenario where my daughter has a problem, she's not looking for a solution,
Right,
and she wants to talk about it.
right.
Right.
I'm not going to excel at that. My wife will have a better chance of excelling
How
at
old are
that.
your daughters?
9 and, well, 8 and 7. But
Yeah,
about
you'll get better at it.
Oh, no, but it's going to get much worse before it gets better. That's the problem.
That's the mark
but
of
I
a
can-
good leader, though.
But
is
you
that
can
you're-
see
that
that
you're
she's
able-
going to be better.
Right, that you can see where people, because with the conferences, I lead a team of people. There's like 10 people. That
Right.
doesn't mean I always get my way by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
In fact, usually it means that, if you're the leader, you are the one who gives credit when things go good, you take credit when things go wrong, and you work to fix things, and you work, well, in this class, this is not true for this class, but in most situations, you work harder than everyone else because you're really putting your neck out there and working like crazy.
Yeah.
In this class,
Greg, you were
That's
mentioning
different, but-
in some situations where the man is not allowed to lead in the home and the
Yeah.
woman forces her decision-making on everyone.
Right.
Eventually, both man and woman develop psychiatric and psychological problems in the long run because
Right.
of that.
And that's one of your pathways towards divorce, I think, because you don't. But if I never gave in to her decision making, it would be the very same problem. Because I think you can't always be. So the man being the head of the household, I don't think is 100% of the time
Well, yeah.
types
Oh, no.
philosophy.
No.
I think you can be the head of the household, but if somebody has a better idea, you've got to realize it and say, okay, well, we're going to do your idea.
Right.
But as a leader, I think you can say, your idea is better, and I'm deciding to do your idea. And so, in a way, I don't mean that in a bad way to say, oh, well, I came up with that idea, so we're going to do it. No, I mean to say that, you can still be the leader by giving away power. We don't normally think of that
Right.
as a leadership philosophy of allowing someone else to make a decision as being leadership, but I think that can easily be a leadership strategy. Because some of the best CEOs of big successful corporations don't make any decisions on their own. They are advised, they look at the stuff, and given the information in front of them, they go with one of their ideas. None of the ideas are coming from the top.
John Maxwell, who's written, a bajillion
Yeah.
things on leadership,
Moses
he
delegate.
describes his definition of leadership is enabling people to be all that they can be.
Exactly. Taking their ideas and putting them into action.
Exactly. No, he doesn't say enabling. He says empowering.
Empowering.
It was an
Yeah.
E word, but
Yeah.
empowering people to
Yeah.
be all that they can be. Which,
Yeah.
if you use that definition,
Right.
that's a good one.
Right.
But you're gonna
Interesting.
have more support and people following you when you do that.
That's true.
And enable or empower
That's true.
them to be all that they can be
And feel like they're part
show
of the
that,
process.
yes, that you support them and that you're willing to listen to them. You're gonna have more support from them in the next time when you may
Right.
say, well, we're gonna go with this
Mhm.
decision this time.
Right.
They'll support you in that because
Right.
you supported them.
Right. Which in
Right, and you
reality,
build a strong structure,
if we
a
go-
strong
Sorry.
command structure by doing that. Yeah.
Right. If you go full circle, that's what Christ does with the church. He empowers us to be, he gives us what we need to be the people that we can be.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting. So anybody want to pray and we'll get out of here?
Dear God, thank you for this wisdom that you've put in front of us. Let us have a wonderful week, and thank you for Jill. Thank you for her starting this class. We will miss her, but we wish her well in Midland, San Angeles. Please give us have nice, safe, happy, healthy weeks, and let us remember your word throughout the week. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.
Amen.